Okay, good evening. My name is Megan Sylvester, and I am a music sociologist, and I am currently doing this podcast specifically entitled Calypso, the New York Experience. And I'm speaking to persons who would have resided in New York City and would have been part of either the Calypso fraternity in that space or members of the industry itself. Today I'm speaking to Mr. Dawad Philip. Welcome to this series. Welcome to the podcast. And I want to ask you right off the bat, tell me a little bit about the experience that you've had in New York. That would entail, of course, you're telling me how you got to New York to be involved in this industry in the first place.
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me into your space. And well, I'm a Trinidadian, and I'm a poet, a writer, an artist, and so perhaps the best way to introduce the orbit of my life, I would read from my book, A Mural by the Sea, a poem called New World Language. Through Ellis Island, Calypso came, in a tailored suit, a fancy tie, a tilted straw, stepping with a rhythm to the Lavue and Zante of the islands, up to Harlem, down to the village and over to Brooklyn for the dance, rum, and fragrance, to find love settle old scores. Who was queen when Gerald Clark, Attila, Invader, and Gibraltar ruled the Audubon? Is me, Daphne Weeks, with my music and fandangle. When Rufus Goring put the mass on his shoulders and danced it all the way from Harlem to Brooklyn, police on horseback scattering the crowd and beating people. Joe DiMaggio came down at the village gate to hear Rudy, Pops, and Caldera. On Sid Joe's boat rides, Lucille and the girls led the way with baskets of sauce, chicken, and pilau. Just over your shoulder, you might see Lord Melody wave from a yellow cab and fill the halls and free the expatriate soul of sorrow with song. Zanoli is asking for his own room to handle unfinished business. Maestro in a red jumpsuit telling the Brooklyn crowd he hurt his whining bone, have sore throat. Stalin and Swallow, short shirt, fighter and Brigo, Blakey, bomber, pretender, funny and shadow, rudder and explainer, and aloes to their knees in snow, still singing Calypso.
So I guess that's right. Go ahead, yeah.
Calypso came to New York in early 20th century. Well, first with Lovey and then with Lionel Velasco and there. By the 20s, in the early 19s through the 20s, they were already looking to angle their way back to New York to record Calypso music. So New York became the first recording place for Calypso. That sort of sets the stage for my own involvement. I arrived in America in 1968. And growing up in San Fernando, I had, I was lucky. I grew up around and along the Calypso trails, so to speak. Because I grew up in the same house and yard with Stalin, and because of Stalin, everybody else came through, Shorty and Maestro, and everybody, Durango, Sniper, they all came and hung out in the yard by us. So Stalin was big brother, so therefore I was around them from, from the start before their careers were shaped. So there was a show called Southern Talent on Parade, and it was held every Friday at Gaiety Theatre. And so that became my haunt, I guess for if I was living in Harlem in those years as a boy, I would be at the Apollo. Well, in that way, I was at Gaiety in San Francisco. But I came to New York in 1968. Well, actually, to New York in March '69. I landed in America in 1968, but I got to New York in '69.
Okay, sure.
And I started to get. Well, I was always interested in Calypso, so therefore it was just a continuation of what I knew. It wasn't just Calypso; it was also music in general because R&B. I grew up, was raised on Otis Redding and James Brown and Gladys Knight and Aretha Franklin and that kind of thing. That was the music of my generation as teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I got to New York, there was a sense of uh, you wasn't getting the music as much as we took it for granted in Trinidad. But once you got to New York, you found out how precious it was because in those days, the few Trinidadians who congregated would be on weekends, Friday and Saturday, mostly around Franklin Avenue and Fulton Street. And to collect their mail because, for a lot of people, mails came into one particular place as opposed, because people were just so transient, nobody was living, everybody was coming through and working on these night jobs and factories and whatever, just to keep it going. But the Calypso thing started because Billy Reese came to New York. Billy was the big radio DJ of the 60s in Trinidad. He was the DJ who everybody followed. Billy and I were close because I started to do all the Sunday morning shows in San Fernando with the Lunatics and Anne Marie Innes and Mavis John and, everybody, strollers. So by the time I got to New York, Billy was already there. And Billy and I hooked up as would be naturally the case of, the way we were. But by then, Billy, who was born in New York and raised and spent most of his Trinidadian father, so he spent his life between New York and Trinidad. By the time I got to New York, he was back in New York, and he told me to meet him because I had his number. So when I called the number, he told me, "Look, meet me by Granville, Straker." But Granville earlier had just moved from Macon and Fulton Street in Bed-Stuy. It was the sole place for Calypso music in New York City on that level, particularly the production of Calypso music. So Granville Straker, there's nobody that compares to Granville Straker. When I met Granville, the day I went into the record stores to look for what was new in Calypso, I ran into a young gypsy who had just made his first record for Kane. And I ran into Chocolate, both. So that was even gravy because now I'm meeting my heroes and seeing them and saying, Gypsy and I kind of grew up together around Stalin and, so we did have that. But once I hooked up with, Straker moved from Macon and Nostrand to Utica and St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
and became the distributor and uh, the label for just about every Calypsonian.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody.
I, and I'm glad that you're mentioning that because for the audience, they may be hearing these names, the Reese, the Daphne, Peters, all of the names that you're mentioning. And it's so good that you're mentioning and really encapsulating who Straker is and how important he is to the story. So
Yeah,
thanks for doing that. Yeah. Being
Straker
distributor.
is the single most important person in Calypso in New York.
Okay.
Single, nobody comes close.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is that so Straker started to do all the labels. He would run to Trinidad, put these fellas in the studios, come down there, get the stamp, come back up the road, produce, and it was happening almost bi-weekly. But what was happening is that the music was there, but the music was mostly through the passions of West Indians in New York. So everybody knew Australia as the place to go and get the music. But what was happening, Billy Reese being a radio man, Billy got to New York and Billy became the answer to carry the gospel of Calypso. Well, after the Calypso craze of Belafonte and Rudy
Yes.
Valley and
Yes.
Nat King Cole and
Mm-hmm.
Ella Fitzgerald and all of them back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. In the new iteration, Billy did something unthinkable. Billy got a radio program on WLIB FM. Now, there are two at WLIBs. What would become popular in the 1970s and 80s among West Indians was WLIB AM. But
Mm-hmm.
WLIB FM is where all the grand stars of black music, that was the radio station. There were two black radio stations of note, WWRL and WLIB FM.
So let me just interrupt you to ask. So the WLIB FM, when you say the stars, the black stars, what genre are you talking
Radio
about?
stars, yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
What genre are you talking about in terms of
Well,
those stars?
in black music and R&B, jazz, all of these things.
Right,
So
right.
the radio personalities of the day, when we got to New York, there were no. I think Jeff Barnes might have been some remote name, the Jamaican, or some remote name out there, say, but he was playing mostly Jamaican music.
Okay.
Billy Reese came
Yeah.
to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Reese got inside of WLIB FM,
Mm.
and Billy Reese was playing Calypso music on a Sunday. Everybody was tuned into WLIB
Okay.
FM.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the radio station started to grow exponentially, of course, and then what happened was that the Sutton family, who owned LIB FM, changed the FM frequency, stayed on the frequency, but they changed the station to WBLS
Mm.
FM.
Mm-hmm.
And WLIB become an AM
Okay.
thing because AM was still a big part of radio. WWRL with Al G and Gary Bird and these guys, and then W now BLS with Frankie Crocker and Hal Jackson and these guys. And right in the middle of this burgeoning black music industry
Mm-hmm.
was Billy Reese. Billy Reese was playing Calypso music. And so it instantly something started to happen. There was a new market being developed,
Mm-hmm.
and there was Billy right in the middle of it. And that one Sunday, Arnold Henry, we didn't know Arnold from Adam, but what I would do is go with Billy every Sunday just to keep his company and line in the studio with him while he
Mm-hmm.
did just to
Yeah.
watch Billy do his thing. And
Right.
so one Sunday we went to the station and a guy was dressed in a white suit with a frill shirt and um, vest and cummerbund and all kind of thing, just to the nines. and he was waiting there to see Mr. Billy Reese. His name was Arnold Henry, and told Arnold he told Billy he's trying to get into radio. He's from Trinidad, trying to get into radio. If he could just come and watch him work.
You know, I want to interrupt you for a minute there because it's interesting that you're speaking about Billy Reese entering the space and playing Calypso music. Would you say that that was the first introduction after those golden years, as you mentioned, Harry Belafonte and that crew, Nat King Cole? Would you say that that was now the second incarnation of Calypso music in the space? Okay, great, great. All right.
And Billy Reese, once Billy got on the radio, Arnold came, and Arnold, just as a new face, came and watched Billy, and he asked to come back the next Sunday and thing. And Arnold went out there and started his radio program. Out of that came Leroy Curtis. Out of that came a whole wave of them. And then when LIB AM came on, then you saw the likes of Ken Williams and Bob Fredericks and some of those other guys.
So are you suggesting that this was just the mushrooming of varying radio stations? Is that what you mean?
Well,
what exactly happened? Caribbean radio.
As a mass medium for Calypso.
Oh, okay.
That was it right there.
All right.
And of course, by then, Charlie has come along, and Charlie opens Charlie's Records, and he became one of the growing names in the production. So, and then of course, Michael Gould came, and Michael was with B's Records. So there was this proliferation that happened with the Calypso, but not just Calypso. It was happening with Pan, and it was happening with the master label. They started to just blossom into where millions of people started to come up on the Parkway and so. So this
really was this convergence of the master Pan and the Calypso really coming together in its fullest fruition, if you will, in New York. Yes? And you see simultaneously there were these
because what happened at the start of the 70s was I can't remember the exact bill that was passed granting more freedom of movement for people out of the Caribbean and particular places in outside of Europe. So in that wave is when a whole lot of West Indians came. Most of the people who came to New York and environs came in the new wave, came during those years, from 70 through the 80s.
Yes.
Because then freedom, travel was easier, access to money was easier. Trinidad was going through its oil boom, so people were
mobile.
more able, and a little more worldly, more accustomed to jumping on a plane and going. People were still applauding when a plane took off or landed, not afraid to pray loud in the plane,
Yes.
So, but that brought a new wave of a community, a bigger community. So people from the other islands and all over. And here they are. And then the live shows, Earl Harris, particularly, Earl started to have the annual Madison Square Garden concert, which would have given a whole lot of Calypsonians a first trip outside, and particularly to New York. So I could count Brigo, Stalin, Valentino, And those are the guys who, my house is like a revolving hotel, Astor Johnson bring a whole dance company, but that we were doing what we had to do culturally. So what happened there was that Earl Harris did an amazing thing. Earl Harris rented Madison Square Garden and not the Felt Forum. I don't know if you know the distinction between the Felt Forum and the garden itself.
Yeah.
Felt Forum is a small theater that a lot of artists go there and they come out saying they perform at Madison Square Garden. You know what I mean? It's like it's a it's a smaller space. But Earl Harris went to the garden, the big garden, 20,000 people, and
Mm,
filled the garden over 2 nights. It was
mm,
Mother's Day weekend. So Saturday and Sunday, packed, sold out, and that ran for years. Kitchener, Sparrow, everybody headlining. The other islands were having their own artists,
mm,
Obstinate and all of that. But so the recording has grown to where music is just a full industry.
mhm.
Charlie's Records, Straker Records, Bees, there were a few other labels out in Queens. A couple of recording people started their labels and so.
I want to ask you a question. You mentioned earlier about the audiences, meaning the migratory movements, the people coming from the islands, who then presented this group of persons who love Calypso and who love Caribbean culture. And I get a sense from you that you're making the point that this then provided the opportunity for a very present audience to be there to help
But yeah,
with these
yeah.
events. Okay, right. So it's
So
important to
to
understand.
understand the landscape during that
Right.
time, there was one store owned by an Italian
Mm,
with some prescient kind of forward thinking who opened a Caribbean market.
mm,
One store where everybody went to buy saltfish and buy plantain and cassava and the things they get from home.
right.
And then, of course, the Koreans came after and just blew up the place with food. But one guy, there was one roti shop in Brooklyn. You know
Mm,
what I mean?
yeah.
So by then, people are coming and they want food and they want the food that they know. So
Right.
small restaurants opening and be able to buy rather than have to come Nostrand and St. Mark's every Saturday. You could stay wherever you are, and the Koreans would happily provide
Okay.
West Indian food for you. So what I'm
Mhm.
saying is that came the need for entertainment. So that
Right.
whereas we started partying in the basements, now the bigger halls were coming into play. The Belrose Ballroom, Aristocrat Manor, Wisco Manor,
Mhm.
Tilden Hall, and later on. So the parties, and then from the parties, at, at, at the same time, the Labor Day is growing. And before you knew it, this whole thing was going on. So I came on, I hadn't done any real promotions in New York. I did bring a band and a mass band, which is I designed mass. So I brought a mass band 1 year. The
Yes.
same year that Kalyan had put out this album that was playing across the border. And I thought, I got it in my head that maybe if I put Kalyan on the Parkway,
Mm,
that would be a cool thing. And I went out there with another group called Airports Mechanics. Um, and we had Kalyan on the road. And after that, I wanted to get involved in the Calypso thing because, by then, Leroy would come up whenever, whoever came up, and if need be, they stayed with me. And then I had this idea. The person who I had not seen come to Trinidad, come to New York
yeah.
ever was Lord Blakey.
Ah, okay.
And I set out to find out what was going on. So when I came to Trinidad, I went to look for him, and then I found out the story that he had a problem back in about 40 years ago. Then that with the authorities in Puerto Rico, and he was debarred from entering the United States.
Mm.
So I told myself everybody else was coming, and I had been and you should know that I'm also a journalist. So I was writing about all of this movement of the people and all of this music and people like Short Shirt and all these folks coming to the fore with brand new music, and WWRL is suddenly it's a all Caribbean station. WLIBAM is suddenly an all radio station. The college radios are playing Calypso. Rivaling reggae at that time for the New York market. So I was writing about this for the Amsterdam News, and I later became the editor of the Daily Challenge years after. But I'd been writing since the Amsterdam News. So by the time I got to the Daily Challenge, I was now the editor of the Daily Challenge and started to promote the culture on that level now through journalism. And so I was telling you, so Blakey was the challenge. So I reached out and I asked some friends in Trinidad to help me let me see if we could get some petitions and get some bureaucratic support to get Blakey to visit the United States, because everybody was there. Everybody was having a chance because I had started the Living Legends of Calypso, which was an annual show I started back in 1990, 94, 93 or something like that. And we started to bring the stars. The first one we did was at Tropical Reflections, and that first one had, but no, that's not really fair. The first vintage show that I attended was Albert Telemark, who is known in Brooklyn as DJ Gold. And DJ Gold did a back in time show, and I went to that, and I knew I wanted to do that. That's when I knew what I wanted to do.
So let me ask you that. So just so that we have a sense of it. So you're saying that you were instrumental in what? You're speaking about Blakey. You're speaking about this show that you've now discovered. You've gone to this telemark show and you've realized this is what I want to do. Do you mean that is getting Calypsonians to be part of this New York space to perform?
Absolutely. And for the first time, in a lot of ways, for the first time. So I'll tell you about some of them.
Yeah.
So that Blakey was the first one. For me, in other words, everybody was coming. At that time, Composer was here, would come up and do a show now and then for Gold. Composer, Pretender, Bomber, the vintage stars. But I wanted to do the Living Legends of Calypso. And I wanted Blakey to headline that. So I went to Gold, who was like my big brother. And I said, I want to do it. He said, but you could get Blakey. I said, why would I get Blakey? But he said, well, if you could get Blakey, I want to be a part of that show. And I put that in motion. And it took us to get a letter from then the Archbishop Anthony Panton, the then leader of the opposition, Patrick Manning, the then head of security, national security, Huggins was his name, the then Holy Commissioner. In other words, we went about with a petition and support from the top people in the country. Yes. And Paula Atherley did that, and we went, and she went and made the appeal to the U.S. Embassy, and they granted him a one-time entry. Once we got that, we put together the first Living Legends of Calypso. And Blakey's coming to New York for the first time in his career. Huge, bigger than life in Trinidad and through all the islands, Canada, London, everything. But he's coming to...
You know what is interesting about this story?
Mhm.
Who headlined that show? Because you know, in Calypso shows of our time now, there's always a headliner. So who headlined this first Living Legends Calypso show?
Well, it had to be Blakey because
I thought so.
he was the one person that
Yes,
everybody wanted to see. In other
right.
words, people were coming to these vintage shows back in times, Calypso, so to speak. And I said, but what about Blakey? When are they going to bring Blakey? So Blakey was the most sought after. And
Right.
everybody tried, they tried all kinds. Nobody could get Blakey to America.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to bring Blakey to America. And by the way, it's a play. I've written it as a play, and
Okay.
it's in production right now at UWI.
Okay.
So that is going to be coming up. And so the first year we got Blakey, the two shows were sold out. People were around the block. It's Thanksgiving weekend, so I
Mm-hmm.
need not tell you how cold it is, and people were out in the cold
Yeah.
around the block for two shows.
Mm-hmm.
People are lines around the block
And where was
for
this show held?
at Tropical Reflections.
Oh, okay. All righty. Mm-hmm.
And after that show, so I knew then I had to get Blakey back. So we did Blakey. He went back to Trinidad, and we came back, and I decided, look, let me do something else with this. So I came to Trinidad, took Errol Ince with me, and sat down with Pelham, and I said, I want to produce a record called The Glamour Boys Again,
Mm.
and Living Legends. So Errol became the arranger, Pelham became the producer, and we put together what would be a traveling show. So it became Blakey. I went to Grenada and we hunted down. It took me months to find King Fighter. Nobody knew where he disappeared. And we went to Guyana, and the old Canary, who was the Minister of Culture then. We said, boy, no, boy, that man, we don't know where he is. He's Guyanese, but we can't tell you where he is. And somebody found him. Blakey helped me, and we found him in Grenada.
Mm.
So we brought Fighter to Trinidad, put Blakey in Trinidad, composer, funny, Brigo, Scrunter, what's his name? Oh man, what's his name? Uh, Mystic Prowler,
Okay.
and we recorded the Glamour Boys again. And that was 1990 somebody, seven or something like that. And that show, we did two shows. And I need to tell you, I recorded it, but the producers on that show were co-producers with me were Mervyn Taylor, Roland Guy, um, um, Gary McIntyre, and myself, the four of us. So we produced
Okay.
the thing, and that show with um, Clem Bowen as my road manager uh, did two shows in sold out shows in Brooklyn, and then we went on the road. We went to sold out show in Boston, Massachusetts, and we went to cross the border to Montreal. So we took that show went on the road. Um, uh, it we had problems because the driver got lost. So the show in Montreal we didn't give ourselves enough time. So by the time we got to Montreal, we were lost. And when we did get ourselves inside of the city of Montreal and got to the venue, it was about 2 hours after, and a lot of people had gone back home, but a lot of people stayed faithful.
Mm-hmm.
So that show would have carried Blakey to a whole nother space and carried the vintage thing to a whole nother space.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, and that show was now held at Aristocrat Manor. And the following year, I did, but maybe 2 years after, I think it's the following year, I put Regeneration now, who had never been recorded. They did backup for singers and everything. I took them in the studio and did their classic CD. where they sing the 5 rules of Calypso and Never Worry and all those songs, and brought them as part of the tour to
Right.
the New York thing. And so they were, again, those were first time people in New York, King Fighter, a whole lot of people coming for the first time. And that's what we were able to do. And we did that for years.
And I want to just interrupt you for a minute to say that this is really interesting because we are talking about Calypso, the New York experience, and now you have sort of provided a segue into the whole concept of Canada in terms of Montreal. And I don't know that a lot of people are familiar with that aspect of it. That is people in today's generation, because they always feel that there was a limit, to the spaces where Calypso reached. And it's good for you to mention that you also took these Calypsonians in particular, Blakey and the others, to Canada and Montreal, as opposed to Toronto or
also to Boston
right. And so it's good to know about the expanse and the reach of Calypso.
To Washington, to a lot of stuff.
Right.
So, and so that went on, and then later, I did the Living Legends for, I believe, 7 years. 7 years.
Okay.
On the road and locally, and then by then Lincoln Center is coming, getting the buzz, and they come to see what we're doing, and the next thing I know, they decide they're going to put a Calypso show at Lincoln Center, which is always what happens.
Right.
But so by then, by 2000, I don't know, 2002 and 2001, I think, I started the Big Apple Calypso Review. Okay. I was in Trinidad with Marjo Tent, hanging around Marjo, not as a part of it, but hanging out there because my friends were there. Blakey was there, Power was there, all these guys had recorded and that kind of thing. Try.
Okay. All right. So, folks, welcome back. We are here speaking with Dawad Philip for this podcast that I'm doing for this series entitled Calypso, the New York Experience. My name, of course, is Megan Sylvester, and I'm a music sociologist. And now we resume our interview with Dawad Philip. So, Mr. Philip, where we left off in the first part of the interview, we're talking about Straker, you were talking about Billy Reese, you were talking about all of these people who were part of this community that you were a part of and the work that they were doing. So I just want you to just tap into that and continue to tell us about what has been happening.
Okay, but I want to mention that there were Calypso tents going on too. I don't want to look as though my tent was the only tent. My tent was the most successful of the tents.
And what I want you to do at this time, tell us the name of that tent again.
The Big Apple Calypso Review, and I'll tell you how it came about. But more importantly, I want to tell you that Bees had a Calypso tent at Bees Palace, who's Michael Gould.
Right.
And Frank Smith had his Calypso tent at the Rainbow Terrace, and Bodell had a little grassroots Calypso tent over in Flatbush. So those tents were operating, and then, but by the time I came, they were no longer around. So the Big Apple Calypso Review. So I was telling you that the intent was to bring the Marjo tent to New York.
Right.
And Errol Fabian and I agreed in principle to do the show. We worked out a budget and how many people we needed to bring to New York, la-di-da-da-da. I went ahead and I got the venue, which was Restoration Plaza.
Right.
And I have had a record there at the time because I've worked at Restoration Plaza for almost 20 years in the corporation there.
Right.
Out of the Daily Challenge. Our offices were there. So I was known. So they encouraged me and glad to hear I'm doing something like that. So anyway, so I went and I booked the venue and everything and looking for this Marjo tent to come to New York. And Errol reaches out to me and he says, "Boy, I ain't think that could happen, you know, boy. Here what happening, boy. It's this I'm doing that I'm doing, and I can't leave Trinidad." So I said, "Well, that's the end of the tent." So I went back to, there was a woman named Jackie Woods to tell her, "Look, I know I ain't gonna get back my deposit for booking the whole tent, but the show is not coming off." And she says, "Why isn't the show coming off?" I said, "Well, because the tent I was bringing to New York, they can't make it." So she says to me, "Dawad, I've known you how long? You know, if you want a tent, you could do a tent. I'm not taking back, I'm not giving you back your money, and I'm not taking no financial. Put a tent together." That Brooklyn
Right.
born woman, I mean, she no real Caribbean lineage.
Right.
But her faith said to me, "Look, you want a tent, do a tent."
Right.
Well, so she told me to do a tent. I said, "Well, you could just snap your finger and do a Calypso tent." But I leaned on first person I talked to, I believe was might have been Beckett. Yeah, Beckett. And the next person I talked to was Stalin. I called him. I said, "Leroy, I'm putting a tent together in Brooklyn. You should put me name." He asked me when is the date, whatever, how long. Then I said, "Put me name."
Right, right.
And,
Mhm.
and I was able to put Stalin's name. And when I put Stalin's name, I will say, "Well, I am that."
Mhm.
Explain. I said, "Well, of course." Um, who are some of those people? Princess, um, who was very sick at the time, and in fact, she was the first on the cast, but she never made it to the opening night of the tent. She died before the opening night. We carried,
Oh.
we had her as on the cast, and we left it there. We paid a full salary to the family because,
Mhm.
you know, and
Yes.
then on that tent was would have been on that tent Beckett, a fellow called the Ivan from Guyana.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
no designer was on the next show. Um,
Okay.
um,
Mhm.
Trying to think of who else would have been on that show.
Mhm.
Uh, but anyway, so that show came up. I know Jeff Medina, all my musician friends came through. Roy came and ran the band for that opening year to kind of kickstart the thing with Errol and Joey Rivers. I mean, the other Rivers, not Joey. Um,
Vincent?
Vincent Rivers
Yes.
on bass.
Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
actually, it wasn't Vincent on bass at all. It was
Okay.
what's his name from Charlie's Roots, a dear friend. Can't think of his name now. But anyway,
Mhm.
so that was the first year, and it was such a huge success. But it was a success almost because it was destined to be successful. But I was planning to do a promotional thing, and I had to get the name of the tent approved. So what I did was, so Alan was asking, "So what do you want to name the tent?" I said, "Well, we're gonna name it the New York Calypso Review," because he was with me. So hey, Calypso Review.
Ah, so you see that is an important point there because I was
Yeah.
wondering how come you got the name review, and I think the audience would be really pleased to hear that little tidbit about
Yeah.
why that little
Well,
story.
it's because Alois was there, and Alois asked me, and because Alois, was thing, and Stalin was, around there. So I said Calypso Review, and there was just this small problem of Jazzy Pantin, who was the tent manager, would have to give the okay on it. And Alois said, "Don't worry, I can reach out to Jazzy." And he reached out to Jazzy, and Jazzy said, "Do it, I'm coming to support him."
Right.
And he sent a message to tell me he's coming. And Jazzy
Okay.
showed up for the opening night.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Jazzy would show up every year and just line with me and tell me, give me encouragement and tell me, them fellas gonna try to cut your throat, but you could cut your throat, cut your tooth.
You know what's
Jackie was
interesting? Yeah, you know
a
what's
very sharp
interesting?
man.
And
Yeah,
what's interesting about this particular point is this linkage between Trinidad and Tobago, the Calypso fraternity and the tent system there, and New
yeah,
York. Because sometimes I think when I speak to different persons, they suggest that there was a divide. So there was this whole thing taking place in New York, and then there was what was happening in Trinidad. And I'm really glad you're able to create that link
yeah.
between the two spaces.
Well, yeah. But it should be noted, however,
Mm-hmm.
that the fraternity in Trinidad supported me, but Tuco never did.
Okay.
Panther was the president then, and there were a couple of instances where I needed Tuco's help, but it didn't matter because
Mm-hmm.
the important thing is every Calypsonian was coming on. Every year, I just had to build this thing more, and and Tuco got the idea. I did get a couple of years some help from the Ministry of Culture.
Okay.
I got importantly the first year I got a friend who was on the board of Caribbean Airlines to get Caribbean Airlines on board. It helped with the travel and things just fell into place. So
Mm-hmm.
that we did the first couple of years, and then one day Duke meet me in Port of Spain. He said, "I had to talk to you, I said, "I had to talk to me." He said, "So why do you?" I said, "Well, you do me not. No, why you think you do this?" He said, "Well, I feel I'm doing something because everybody on the cast and you put Duke on the cast and so." And that was the thing. It always was everybody was happy to come on board and were
Right.
treated equally.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it was there was never and importantly, racial price. So
Mm-hmm.
I am pretty sure but and Rachel MC the show for the first 9 years or something.
Okay.
Sprangalang came on after, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Deborah Maillard as what's her character name? Uh, um, who does the cleaning woman character?
Yes, yes.
Philomena.
Yes. So,
Philomena.
so this is interesting. So tell me what's the length of this tent? Because you said it was Rachel Price, then Sprangalang, then Deborah Maynard. How many years did you have this Calypso tent in New York, Dawad?
12 years. 12 years.
Okay.
12 years. 12 years. And the reason that it I stopped it is mostly because I was more by then I had moved to Trinidad. I was
Oh, okay.
packed up my bags and come home to Trinidad the to work with the mayor of San Fernando. Ian Atlee
Okay.
became the mayor, and
Okay.
I just resigned my job as an editor at
Mm-hmm.
the daily paper I worked for. So I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of free, and that sounded like something I wanted to take on. Came to
Mm-hmm.
San Fernando and started the jazz festival,
Mm-hmm.
and out of that started to take the calypso into the jazz idiom because
Mm-hmm.
people like Ralph Robertson and they around me and Ray
Mm-hmm.
and we were starting
Mm-hmm.
to take calypso themes and put it into
Mm-hmm.
the jazz format and so that went on and
But you know, Joanne, I want to stop you for a minute because I just want to exhaust a little more this whole concept of the Calypso tent in New York. So we understand, of course, why it is you stopped it. But could you give us a sense of the nature of audiences? You spoke about the audiences earlier on,
well
part of the interview. So did you notice that audiences were waning as time went on in terms of the interest for the Calypso tent?
that calypso tent, the Big Apple calypso tent had never had that problem.
Okay,
Big Apple
okay,
calypso tent was always, oh God, I hope they call the fire department.
okay, okay, got it.
And because that was the energy of that tent. That tent, when
Right.
we have ladies' night or 2-on-1 tickets, you would literally see the tent moving because people want to lean on the post and I mean, you know, and I have some enemies to this day because one particular fella, big in the dance, I wouldn't call his name, brought his friends to the tent, and with no disrespect, I told them, "Well, you come tomorrow night because I just have no more room inside of there." People were the fire department came and warned me. So no, my tent never had audience issues.
Okay.
Never had audience issues because uh the reputation of the tent. To this day, people meet me. You know, I was up in Brooklyn for the summer, and everybody wants me to do a tent. Other people have tried, and whatever measures of luck and success. I cannot say that about the Big Apple Calypso Review. Everybody, it was a singular experience, and when it came to its end, it was the end of that kind of tent experience in New York.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit now about audience interest in Calypso. Apart from visiting the tent and coming to hear the stalwarts, you know, deliver their renditions. Because what we see happening now is that there seems to be this attrition, this interest in Calypso music in New York. And so we're trying to find out what has accounted for that over the years. So what was the last day of your tent in New York? And then can you explain a little bit about what happened after? I know you said you went back to Trinidad, but do you have a sense of what happened?
2012 was the last year.
Okay.
And what started to happen was that, you know, I mean, if okay, so I will give you a sense of that cast. By the time I left, the cast was Stalin, always Aloes, singing Sandra, Denise Plummer, Baron, Swallow, King Short Shirt thing. In other words, the kind of show Ronnie McIntosh for a couple of times. Yes.
Okay.
So the kind of show and the kind of with people like Deborah Millard and Sprangalang and you know it was the idea was to keep people interested, you know, keep people interested. So we would make changes every year. I would introduce different things. Rachel was a stand-up show on her own, so Rachel was an attraction equal to any other headliner. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And we just had the best Calypso band in the whole wide world. It was just nobody.
And which Calypso band was this?
Well, it was run by Sunshine, Don Diaz.
Right.
Frankie McIntosh on keyboards, and then when it isn't Frankie, was Philip Nichols.
Okay.
Jimmy Brown on guitar.
Right.
Rampasad on saxophone.
Gerald.
Gerald Rampasad, yeah. Gerald on trumpet. There was a American fella on the other second trumpet. What's his name was from out of Barbados. So in other words, we started with Errol Wise on drums, and we started, you know, it just went from bad to badder to the baddest band. You know, I mean, one of the things about that band that separated them from any other band, it's almost as if Sunshine would challenge you how many songs they knew without a music score in front of them.
Right.
And I think a lot of times that's how we decided who was in the band, because and it allowed the artist crazy. If I can't think of who didn't perform at the time, but was always don't rely on a score in front of you. You have to be nurtured in Calypso so that a man would call a tune and all you want is the key.
Right.
You're supposed to know that if you're a serious Calypso musician. And a lot, that's what happened with that. Kurt Francisco on trombone. That's what happened with the fellas who made up that band. Them fellas
Okay.
knew Calypso. Them fellas knew Calypso. So, you know,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so we were able to do that, and it showed. We were able to bring comedy. We were able to bring the best extempo artists around.
Right.
Gypsy, Lady Africa, Butch, Big B, you know.
Okay.
So
So it was
you
a
got
foot.
you got the cream
Right.
of the crop. So there was
Right.
no.
Right.
It was the place to be. People woke up. Listen, my thing was we would close the tent on the Friday, Labor Day Friday, because I said, well, by Saturday is Panorama and Sunday is this and thing. And Becca told me, Dawad, you know, we had to have that show Saturday night, you know. Don't worry about that, you know. Not everybody wants to go on here, pan, you know. And I took a gamble with that, and it's one of the better nights we always had.
Okay.
Saturday night.
Right.
So there was always an audience because people bought season tickets for that tent. So they would come every night. The night they didn't come, they give the tickets to somebody else. So that's a level of support. And people knew that if I said A was going to be on the show, they knew A coming.
So what happened, Dawad? What do you think happened? You're talking 2012, you're talking the rest of the 2000s, you know, into, you know, we know that the pandemic hit in 2020, well, 2021, you know, and 2022, we had all of that movement. But what happened between 2012 and those years thereafter? Can you say?
I really should not try to answer for anybody with that.
Of course. This is just your opinion.
Yeah, but you see, the Big Apple Calypso review was done with the love and passion for something that I am steeped in Calypso. I born and raised in Calypso. I sang Calypso as a boy on Antiki and was the first person to sing Calypso on Antiki. And they came after and everybody said, this is what we want our children to be doing.
Right.
So I in Calypso since I small. Leroy helped me to write the first Calypso to go up the road to sing. So I am worried about my credentials, you know, in that. But what happened is that what I brought in, I wasn't afraid to fail, and I wasn't doing that for money, because most of the times, all the success I'm telling you about, I have nothing to show for it because I made sure everybody got paid, you know? And so my reputation with that, all I need to do is put out a call right now and say I'm doing the tent. And I have a cast would call me back in about 15 minutes. Count me in. Because the experience, nobody had a bad experience in the Big Apple Calypso tent. So from a business standpoint and from the energy, good energy, you know, so it was a unique thing. And that's why I say I don't think there could be another experience like that again.
Okay, all right. Because part of what the challenge has been, or is actually right now, is that, you know, speaking to young people, speaking to some of those successive generations about Calypso in New York, you know, we realize that a lot of young people just want to go to soca fest. When you talk about Calypso, you mentioned Calypso, there's a challenge, there's, you know, I don't know if I want to go to that. It's still have Calypso, is that still interested? Is that still something that we should be interested in? Really, you know? And so that's part of what I'm trying to work through is this whole issue about, of course, what has gone before and what is now, and whether Calypso has a future in a space, in a major city like New York.
Yeah, well, you know what happened? Okay, to be clear, the core audience for Calypso is still a mature audience.
Right.
And more, you know, people, because they age and they tend to not come out as they used to and all of these things. What my Calypso did was keep it the appeal, made it appealing. So people You know, it's almost you could come out of the tent and when you come home, your cologne are flat. You know what I mean? You
Yes.
know, come out and you lie, you bring your lady and you're looking nice and thing. And that's what happened. And then just the spontaneity of it, in the entertainment part of the show. You know, the first show back in the Living Legends days, the first time we saw anybody come up and hand money out to an artist and then followed by a whole procession and whole audience was that first living legends of Calypso.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That Pretender was singing, and Pretender, the band wasn't up to strength, and Pretender started to riff this extempo on the band and give them so much licks and instructions on how to play music and thing. And Joan Williams, who was John Buddy Williams' wife, and and the Williams brothers' mother, she came down the aisle and handed out the first $10, and everything happened after that. So the Living Legend show went on for 7 years. The Big Apple went on for 12 years, and
Okay. Mm-hmm.
good. uh, I think a part of it that is it happened at the right time. You
Okay,
know,
so that is important to think about. Timing is
yeah,
key.
yeah,
And so, okay, so what I want to do though, because of the contribution that you've made to the Calypso industry fraternity, you began earlier to tell us about what happened when you decided to go to Trinidad. So tell us a little bit about this fusion music, this, bringing the Calypso and jazz, because I think that's also an important part of where Calypso has reached.
yeah. Well, the whole thematic idea, um, the person who, well, you know, first, well, I should say, Clive Zander was doing the whole calypso jazz kind of thing. But the first person who did wanted to do the concept of a whole show around a jazz calypso kind of experience was Ralph Robertson,
Okay.
who had who wanted me and came and said, Dawad, but we need to do the hat. I said, the hat? I said, yeah, we're doing the hat. And he started to hammer that out, what they had. And it was a tribute to Kitchener, the
Okay.
hat.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so we took Kitchener's music and we took Leston, and Leston created um, Panane Minor and Symphony G in classical formats. And we had bands do jazz interpretations. We had, you know, so that we took the music and explored the music to all its potentials and possibilities. And so once that started to happen, then it was 1 year we did Stalin as the theme, 1 year we did Sparrow as the theme, you know. So we did Shorty as you know, as part of that. So and by that we talking that we would do brass, we would do pan, we would do voices, and you know that
Mm-hmm.
sort of, so that um the first person that well, I'm not the first person to bring him. I'm the first person to bring him to San Fernando, Hugh Masekela, and
Right.
put him on San Fernando Hill.
Right.
And out of that came the Siparia to Soweto that you
Right.
see out there now.
Right. Right.
So good things happen, you know, good things
Okay.
happen. Good things
Mm-hmm.
happen.
All right. One of the things that, as we, come to the close of the interview, I want to find out from you, having been involved in the Calypso landscape, on the Calypso landscape for so many years. You started off with Auntie K, then you spoke about your relationship with Stalin and, helping you write music, and then coming to New York, doing this tent, and then coming back to Trinidad and still being immersed in that space, but, for this fusion music. Where do you think Calypso is now, and where do you see it going in the future?
I could only speak for myself. I really
Of
enjoy
course.
some of this new music that's out there. You know,
Okay.
I think but what I like about it is that the classic songs are music for all time, like the Panorama in Brooklyn this year was a good example. All the bands were playing Engine Room, but the band that would win played Black Man Feeling the Party.
Right.
So that that the songs are the cream rise to the top,
Yes.
and then it enters into that great realm of great music,
Right.
So and there's great music going on. A lot of the young singers have are learning the craft. Every year you listen to them, there's more maturity, more lyrical, application,
Okay.
so that you just can't just write a hook line, a hook line, a hook line.
Right.
They're learning to do melody better. They're learning to be lyrically clearer, understand that what meter is and what rhyme and measure and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think we're in a good place. I'm not. You still have the fellas who running in the studio should save the money and buy doubles, but for the most part,
Yes.
people,
Yeah.
we're in a good place. We're in a good
Okay.
place. When one song could dominate a panorama, that goes back to Kitchener. It's only Kitchener used to do that.
Okay.
When Kitchener put a tune out there, all the bands playing Kitchener.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Whether it is Flag Woman or Reno Rama or whatever. Now a young boy, come out and sing in the room. Not a new idea, but done with a certain level of originality and infectious spirit, and soulful. All the bands decide we want to take a taste of that,
Right. Okay.
So that's my feeling about the Calypso thing.
All right. Well, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to mention that you think.
Well, no. Like I mentioned earlier, the play Sunday with the Warlord. Sunday with the Warlord is going to be out after Carnival, right after Carnival, so that the visitors coming in would be able to experience Sunday with the Warlord with Curtis Gross as Blakey and Penelope Spencer as Queenie and music by Martha Newton and her band.
Right.
And it's just an awesome experience.
Okay.
So it's part history and all culture and all music.
Okay, good. All
right.
So thank you so very much. You're very welcome. And thank you, Dawad Philip, for participating in this interview and this podcast series, Calypso, the New York Experience. And we really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing a story and many stories that I'm sure many persons were not aware of. So thank you so very much again.
You're more than welcome. Have a good one, mate.
Take care. Bye-bye.